Softly now, let us begin. Close your eyes if you like, or do not. Listen instead like someone listening to the steady, slow turning of gears in a distant engine. Imagine a sky that is older than the stories you have been told. Imagine stars so far away, their light arrives like a lullaby for ghosts. In that light, the galaxy breathes in a slow, metallic rhythm, a pulse of distant engines and quieter things, ancient as bone and patient as stone. We start on a world called Terra, the cradle and the grave of 1,000 suns. Once, long before the names lost themselves beneath the dust of battle, Terra hummed with a kind of shallow peace. It was not the warm, living peace of meadows and rivers. It was a different calm, the clean, efficient hush of cities that have learned to keep their sorrow contained. There were towers that held the sky like the ribs of a sleeping giant, and glass spires through which light flowed like water. In the nights between the machine lights, you could hear the faint murmur of old machines still obeying commands from operators long turned to dust. This is how the beginning feels, the hush of a place that has learned to carry its own history like a cloak. Close, familiar noises knit themselves into the air. The soft click of servo actuators in maintenance drones, the very low-frequency note of reactors feeding whole neighborhoods, the etheric hum of voxcasts that cross continents, and the black between them. These sounds are companions. They are the sounds of survival, practiced and unromantic. From this cradle, a child stepped into the world. He was a boy at first, with a name that would live like a stone in the mouths of many. Horus. He was not yet a warlord, not yet a legend, not yet a ruin to be mourned. He was small enough to be carried. He had the kind of eyes that watch and do not blink away things other people would rather forget. There are certain faces that remember the shape of mercy. Horus's face did this then. It kept small mercies like threads in a sleeve, a look for a tired man, a hand placed without admonition on a soldier's shoulder, a sunlit smile that puzzled the stern and softened the old. Listen to how the description of him settles like breath. He walked through halls where marble and circuitry met, where tapestries were printed with poems in chromatic ink. The air smelled faintly of ozone and warm oil, of incense burned in a chapel whose stone had been smoothed by the palms of worshippers for generations. In the quiet corridors, voices carried, counsel in measured tones, guardians muttering over charts, artisans with blood on their sleeves. He absorbed them the way a child absorbs light. He learned quickly. He learned like hunger. There is a softness to this beginning, essential and deceptive. It is the kind of calm that permits one to breathe steadily, even as the bones remember the ache. Horus sat beneath a vaulted window and watched machinery turning like planets in miniature, their arms weaving with delicate, precise motions. He listened to the whisper of servo hum and learned patience, learned the cadence of command, a quiet that instructs as much as it comforts. But to bind yourself to a machine is to learn its secret languages. Horus was given small things, tokens, tools, fragments of patterning that came with the hands that shaped him. These tokens are not dramatic. They live in the pocket of a soldier's coat. They are the smell of a metal ring worn against the skin, the faint warmth of a gauntlet still retaining a touch. Yet even then, in those small details, a shadow began its patient work. It is not loud at first. It merely whispers beside the fire, an extra note in a familiar hymn. It teaches in italic, like a hand writing in the margin. The galaxy around him is not gentle. There is a melancholy at its core which might almost be mistaken for beauty if one is not careful. Food is grown in vertical farms on ringed planets. Whole fleets float like dark sigils between constellations, engines blinking like insect eyes. There are systems whose names mean nothing to the mouths that warm them, and there are battles that go on without trumpet or color, fought by machines and men who no longer remember why. This is the background hum to a life, conflict, maintenance, procession. Even at rest, the universe carries the echo of war. That echo is a constant, like the low thrum in the chest of a sleeping animal. Horus grew under these sounds. He learned the language of loyalty and learned, with a child's terrible clarity, the weight of expectation. When the Emperor, a presence like an axis through which the many parts of the Imperium turn, took notice of him, the world pivoted subtly. The shelter around Horus changed from the casual warmth of a family to the curated hush of a crucible. This is where our lullaby deepens. There is care here, but it is the kind of care that arranges bones for future strength. It is an artistry that sculpts a weapon and praises it as craft. Yet even as the hand that shaped him was gentle, it worked with a precision that could not be called tender. It is important that you feel how the touch of power does not always speak in loud commands. It gives, yes, but it also takes, breath by breath, habit by habit. Horus learned to hold himself like a promise. In the folds of that promise, the possibility of greater things lived. People stood a little straighter when he entered. His laughter, rare like bell music in a chapel, could shift the mood of a room from dire to manageable. Men who had not smiled in years smiled at him. And yet beneath that smile, the first threads of loss were already woven. The gift of being admired is often the cost of forgetting yourself. There is a subtle hollowing when others' expectations begin to outline your shape more clearly than your own wants. Horus did not lose his goodness so much as he learned to suspend it, to trade small human gestures for the precise efficiency of command. We see this with tenderness, not accusation. A child taught to wield a blade learns to steady their hands. The blade is useful. The hands grow better at holding the blade than holding another person. The world around him, the Imperium, is vast and lonely. It is a machine of civilities and cruelties, of acts performed because they must be performed. The people that orbit this machine are each a small nation, citizens who tend engines, captains who polish armor, priests who pray to patterns that hum in the dark, artists who still make images in forbidden workshops. There is a certain ritual to daily life, the slow grinding of logistics, the quiet prayers in a chapel to a machine god whose icons are spanners and circuit boards, the songs chanted by those who believe salvation arrives as efficiency. This is the scene setting that will soothe and yet begin to fray your comfort. Hear the faint mechanical groan again, as if a great bridge somewhere is flexing in the cold. You will find, if you listen carefully, the melancholy that cannot be shaken, a sense that everything excellent here has been paid for in something else, some small and private thing called humanity. Men who serve the great machine often pay in smiles, in simple jokes, in the warmth of touch. They trade them for armor and oath. They trade them for the right to be called useful. Horus's humanity is palpable at first. He keeps a small private ritual we shall observe like a whispered secret. Before sleep, he closes his eyes and draws a memory of a field he never knew. Brown grass under a sun not too hot, a child's hand reaching for his. He holds that image like a talisman, and for a while it guards him. In the glare of parades and the hush of command, this image becomes a place of refuge. It is soft light in the rooms where he will make hard decisions. We must slow a little here and taste the sensory detail. The voice that tells this tale is not urgent. It is a low, steady cadence, a voice that can be listened to at midnight without waking the dead. The narrative draws in the small things, the rasp of a cloak as Horus walks, the slight metallic scent that lingers on his skin after training, the way his armor's inner padding molds to the shape of a shoulder. There is emphasis on touch, the cold press of ceramite against his jaw, the warm, human friction of a comrade's palm. The contrast between the cold and the human warmth is a friction that will later become an ache, and we introduce the gentle ironies that haunt beginnings. Horus's position of favor binds him to the heart of command. He is taught that unity of purpose is the greatest good. He speaks of peace and men prepare for war. He smiles at the prospect of bringing humanity together, and people sharpen blades so that his words might have meaning. This is the profound lament embedded under calmness. Words like unity and peace are fragile vessels, and those who carry them may be required to fill them with blood. Let us place him now among companions whose names will one day be carved and cursed. There are warriors shaped by gene forges, whose voices are soft with training and whose hands hold weapons like scripture. There are artisans with blood on their fingers and priests with the quiet, somber authority that comes from believing in pattern above person. Among these figures, Horus moves like a new light through a dim corridor, illuminating, warming, but also clarifying things that were murky. Men see in him the possibility of something better. He becomes a mirror. Their hopes are reflected back as expectations, crisp and impossible. The lullaby must maintain its undertow. With every pleasant scene, a feast where laughter breaks like glass, a quiet moment with a comrade beside a dying fire, the hush of star gardens trimmed by robot gardeners, there is an added detail that pricks at unease. A statue stands slightly off-kilter in a courtyard. A chapel is hung with icons whose symbols are irregular. A child's toy found in a maintenance bay is partially made of bone and brass. These are oddities not yet explained, like the small shiver before sleep. They are not threats in themselves. They are suggestions. If you walk farther down the corridor, you might find where the light goes wrong. Horus learns, too, the nature of sacrifice. Not the grand sacrifice sung in banners, but the small, accruing concessions of daily life. He is asked to cede time to duties, affection to tasks, the breadth of himself to the shape required by leadership. His heart, capable of mercy, learns to keep its doors narrow. This process, gentle and incremental, is where we feel the first tremors of loss. There is no sudden theft. Instead, there is a long, patient accrual of absence. Now listen to the imagery that will, like a slow drum, accompany him as he grows. Storms that sweep across dead plains, their winds carrying the smell of rust and ozone. Rain that eats at the paint of wall scripts and reveals older lines beneath. Night skies where satellites fall like scattered teeth. Nature and machine do not live apart here. They are braided with each other, a hedgerow where steel vines climb trees that have learned to hold antennas. This intermingling is both beautiful and bleak, and it gives us the motif of a world that is simultaneously alive and mechanized beyond recognition. In these early chapters of his life, Horus is both beloved and lonely. He is wrapped in favor, and yet he is groomed into a place where love is mostly a function, not a warmth. The people around him have deep affection, but their words are practical. They equip him with armor, teach him strategies, and smooth the way for him to stand in a place where his decisions could tilt the course of 1,000 worlds. He is aware of being used, but he does not resent it. He sees the greater purpose in the shaping. He is, in a way, grateful. Gratitude is a complicated, beautiful thing that can become a chain if one is not careful. We leave this opening with a final image. Horus alone in a small garden beneath a domed sky. It is night outside the dome, but tiny lights mimic stars as if to reassure those who still want reassurance. He sits with his hands folded, listening to a small, patient stream that runs through the garden, water that smells faintly of minerals and oil. The sound is simple, water over stone, the small, honest murmur that fills the space between machines' speech. This sound steadies him, and yet in the far distance beyond the dome, a different whisper begins. Not loud, but present, like the faint static at the edge of a long transmission. It is a sound that will come to him in dreams, quiet at first, then growing teeth. For now, though, it is barely more than the sense of being watched. The child lifts his face to the imitation stars and smiles. a small private smile that holds the memory of a field he has never seen. If you were to press your ear to that smile, you would hear the beginning of a story that will not remain gentle. But we will not rush. We will sit in the hush a little longer, breathing with the chest of the sleeping machine, feeling warmth and the first cool threads of destiny winding through the weave. Stay with that last image. Horus under the dome, water at his feet. The machine sounds like lullabies, and the distant static like a question waiting to be answered. There is solace here, but not for long. The galaxy has long memories, and the hands that shape a boy into a leader shape him with their own hungry purposes. This is the lullaby's secret. You may fall asleep soothed, and yet when you wake, the world will be a different place. For now, rest in the quiet. Horus rests as well. The story is only beginning, and already the shadows know his name. They call themselves many things over time: a legion, a chapter, a brotherhood. For now, in the hush before the storm, they are a family shaped by metallurgy and oath. Their banners are not only cloth, they are catalogs of decisions made beneath pressure. The men who comprise it are at once individuals and instruments. Imagine a river whose surface is patterned with ripples, each ripple distinct, and yet the water beneath moves with a single current. That is the paradox at the faction's center, the appearance of many, the movement of one. At their heart sits Horus, not only as a man, but as a focal point for identity. He is a sun, and the men around him are planets pulled into orbit. The term War Master will later hang like a title-shaped shadow over him, but here, before final titles harden into stone, he is still a person whose charm does the work of a law. The nature of this faction is charismatic. It binds through warmth as much as through command. Where other war families rule by ritual austerity, Horus's men follow because they want to, because he gives them permission to be more than machines. This permission becomes their first gift and their first chain. Ritual matters in their lives. You must imagine the small scripts that lace every day, waking to the hiss of climate seals, the polishing of visors until they reflect not faces but resolve, the passing of knives between hands with a word of blessing that tastes like iron. These rituals are not ornamental, they are curricula. They teach the body how to be a weapon, and the heart how to shelter that weapon's use as virtue. The Legion's tempo is measured out in those rituals, each cadence a repetition made holy by repetition. Over time, repetition becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. The danger lies in the small, soundless slide from habit to hollow. Genecraft forms the physical language of the Legion. It is not a single cold process, but a library of shaping, embryonic patterning, implant arrays, the slow accretion of changelings that make a man into something else. For Horus's sons, this is less an injury than a remaking. Imagine being taught to read through someone else's hands. Your gestures change, your reflexes are recoded, and with each reconfiguration, parts of yourself are mislaid like letters removed from a book. They gain speed, endurance, resilience beyond ordinary flesh. They gain gene seed that is a promise and a prison, a promise of efficacy and a prison of predetermined purpose. There will be fewer nights for simple sleep, and more nights punctuated by dreams that rhyme with training schedules. Yet the technical becomes spiritual. The machines, the gene works, the forges, they are worshipped by many within the Legion, not as tools, but as shrines. The line between technician and liturgist blurs. Veterans administer augmetics like priests distribute sacraments. Servitors move through armor sheds like monks tending relics. The pattern of a bolster plate becomes sigil. This sacralization of machinery is double-edged. On one side, it grants coherence, meaning, and a framework for bravery. On the other, it teaches the heart to turn toward metal when it used to turn toward other people. The machine becomes a surrogate god because it is reliable, impartial, and predictable. Qualities that mercy, with its messy variance, cannot guarantee. Sense the texture of their communion. They drink from shared flasks whose insides are engraved with names and victories. They sleep in barracks where the light is dim and temperature comfort calibrated to sharpen muscles. They speak in clipped voxes, cadenced like hymns, a command, an affirmation, a protocol. In the silence between commands, there is a particular sound, the careful breathing of men who have learned to regulate each intake so it does not betray fear. Fear is not unknown to them. It is merely inconvenient. It is something to be scheduled and managed, like an oil change. Look further at their relationship with the living. Love is present but articulated circumspectly. Brothers are sworn, and the oath binds. These bonds are compact and practical. Pick one up on the field. Don't die on my watch. There are small shows of tenderness, a hand on a shoulder, a quiet joke, a token wrapped in a scrap of cloth. These moments are sacred for how sparse they are. They are the soft tissue that remains around the hard shell of the Legion's identity. The tragedy is that such tissue gets thin over campaigns. With each battle, the count of small mercies is reduced, and a new currency appears: efficiency. Where love once instructed, now duty nudges. And yet, leadership matters. Horus's style of command is not distant. He walks among his men without the full armor that later will symbolize distance. He drinks from their cups, hears their laments, laughs easily. That accessibility is what makes him beloved, and what exposes him to a different danger. When a leader is both personable and preeminent, his desires become indistinguishable from the desires of the group. The Legion begins to mirror his moods, his mercies, his suspicions. This mirroring is not always catastrophic. It can yield courage, loyalty, warmth in the cold gloom of war. But it can also centralize vulnerabilities. When the man at the center feels doubt, that doubt ripples outward and becomes a shared fissure. Now consider the faction's armor and iconography. The plates are ornate and practical, layered with monograms and laurel. Icons depict won battles, births of new standards, and sometimes more private emblems: animals, stars, the shape of a hand. These images matter to men whose lives are otherwise stripped down to function. Icons become stories that can be told quickly, in battle, in a curt command, and provide moral contour when there is little time for moral debate. The danger: icons calcify myths. Once an image becomes sacred, questioning it can feel like sacrilege. Doubt doesn't die easily when the image is the only comfortable shape to hold a thought. Let us dwell on the voice, the vox of the Legion. Slowly, its soundscape grows more than tactical orders. There are lullabies recorded in Vox archives that veterans play quietly before bids of sleep. There are Vox messages from home worlds that travel through wormholes and reach men whose mothers are dust. But the same channels intercept different stuff too. Static that sounds like laughter, patchy transmissions that carry foreign cadences. People learn to listen not only to words, but to the quality of silence. Some silences are the space of reverence. Some are the pressure of something else waiting to speak. The listening becomes nervous. Internal politics exist even in disciplined forces. Not all brothers agree with everything. There is a kernel of human dissent that keeps the Legion from becoming a perfect machine. An old sergeant who recalls a wrong that was never corrected. A young aspirant with ink on his hand from a secret poem. A tech priest who still wears a charm made for a lover. These anomalies act as small pebbles in the stream of conformity. The faction's nature is capable of tolerating variance, but only within bounds. When the bounds shift, subtly, so slowly the men inside feel only a vague unevenness, the tolerance narrows. Men become less able to hold conflicting images. The warm memory of a comrade, the atrocity committed for victory, the taste of victory itself. The cognitive dissonance is managed by reducing the number of variables. Choices become binary. Moral subtlety is replaced by protocols. Here is a crucial junction in their becoming: how they interpret sacrifice. For the Legion, sacrifice is noble because it produces results. Loss is framed as contribution. With time, the rhetoric evolves. To survive is an act of complacency. To make sacrifice purposeful requires continual escalation. Pledges are reinforced. More daring tactics, greater risks, more absolute forms of devotion. What starts as practical training becomes an ethic that prizes extremity. Moral nuance is replaced by ceremony, and ceremony by fervor. The nature of the faction is now feeding on the pattern of giving more and more until only the giving is remembered. Now we move inward to Horus's interior. He is not simply a commander. He is a man being re-scripted by processes intended to create a leader without the liabilities of ordinary life. Imagine your thoughts arriving to you pre-edited, like books where pages have been removed to keep you focused. Horus's inner life is rich and complicated, but increasingly, his self-reflection is chastened by the roles he must perform. The more he embodies the role of unifier, the man who must reconcile countless worlds, the more he must adopt an exterior that tolerates compromise, negotiation, and the hardness of making others give up their private goods. He learns to prefer clarity over the messy temper of personal feeling. But Horus is not simply vacuous. There are traces of tenderness that persist. Acts he could do because he remembers what it was to be small, being given a warm coin, being shown affection without calculation. These traces help him relate, and they become the ligament through which his men attach to him. For a long time, the faction finds its humanity through him. When his laughter is real, men will laugh. When he yields to grief, they hold their silence. The problem begins when these human impulses are co-opted, when Horus himself is given reasons to doubt the goodness of the order that shaped him, or he is flattered with undeserved trust. Flattery in a leader becomes intoxication. It takes a soft diligence to resist the seduction of unmeasured praise. Many cannot. There are small moments of private rebellion that define Horus's character. He will sometimes refuse a parade protocol, choosing to speak to a squad in private. He will allow a joke in the hearing of an officer who expected a chastening. These small infractions are not insubordination so much as insistence on keeping a human face in a mechanical institution. They are the valves that keep pressure from building. But valves can seize. Once the mechanisms of hierarchical pressure change shape, once they begin to demand that warmth be used as leverage, those human moments become dangerous anomalies. The heart that kept them becomes a fault line. The faction's relationship to propaganda clarifies their social mechanics. Their victories are recorded not only as statistics, but as stories. These stories are simplified to create emotional coherence. Over time, simplification becomes a habit. The fewer the complexities, the easier the story is to own and pass on. Children in barrack schools are taught myth summaries. Soldiers are given lullaby epics to listen to as they sleep. These narratives are comforts, but they are also tools. Myths have a way of hollowing out nuance. A man told he fights for virtue will begin to see the code of combat as virtue itself. The consequence? Moral calculus narrows, and the world is partitioned into those who are inside the story and those who are outside it. Now contemplate how the Legion handles loss. When brothers fall, rituals are meticulously observed. Names are carved into plates, memories recited, ashes stored in reliquaries. Yet there is also a practical function. Losses are analyzed for utility. What can be learned? How might this prevent further loss? The paradox is stark. Mourning is honored, but it is reframed as data. Emotional pain is converted into tactical advantage. This is not a callousness so much as an institutional imperative. Over time, the practice trains the heart to be functional. That training is effective. But efficiency in grief tends to shrink the space where tenderness is allowed to grow. Let us turn to the subtle agent that will eventually distort everything: the idea of ends justifying means. At first, Ends are communal and widely approved. Survival, stability, the protection of humanity. But the turn from for humanity to for the idea of humanity as we imagine it is narrow and insidious. When the definition of the keepers of humanity becomes more important than the people they keep, moral inversion takes seed. The faction starts to adopt a logic where preserving the form of order overrides protecting the fragile particulars that made it valuable in the first place. The great paradox: the thing meant to secure humanity becomes the environment within which humanity atrophies. Another fissure opens where the Legion meets the unknown. The galaxy sends many small, uncanny artifacts their way. A relic that hums at night in a storage vault, a codex full of half-remembered prayers, an alloy that appears to respond to thought. Some of these items are curiosities, some are threats. Curiosity can be an instrument of growth. Curiosity can also be greed. When soldiers encounter things that might grant advantage, caution should rule. But curiosity can be persuasive, and advantage seductive. The faction's culture of sacrifice and pragmatism makes it vulnerable. A promise of security through a strange artifact can be tempting. The moral muscle memory of use what works starts to lean toward use anything that works. That slight tilt allows the faction to rationalize more dangerous experiments. It forms a vector along which external malignance, whatever form it takes, can enter. Touch now on the Legion's relationship to the wider Imperium. It is reciprocal and dependent. The Imperium provides resources, validation, and purpose. The Legion provides force, expansion, and prestige. This mutual dependence is not neutral. It elevates both parties in a dance where each must justify the other. The Legion's deeds validate the Imperium's authority. The Imperium's authority sanctifies the Legion's actions. When this equilibrium is healthy, stability prevails. If the equilibrium is interrupted by fear, flattery, or political manipulation, then both parties have an incentive to conceal doubts and misreport facts. Concealment becomes the soil where suspicion grows. Let us imagine a single night watch in the engine rooms. The lamps are low to preserve night vision. A group of veterans sit in a ring, their faces red with the heat of the oil and the day's exertions. They trade old stories, of sieges, of colors won, of comrades who still haunt the corridors. The air smells of metal and sweat, and a hint of something sweet burned into the oil. One of them shows a small, stolen relic, a scrap of alien script that pulsed faintly under his fingernail. They laugh at their own temerity and tuck it away as another trophy. That laughter, warm but narrow, is innocence and complicity in a small, private package. The scene is tender, and also a blueprint of how fascination becomes a foot in a door. We must trace how loyalty can be weaponized. Loyalty is a strength. Behind it stands the capacity to risk everything for another. But as loyalty consolidates around a single figure, it can be reoriented. When that figure begins to desire that loyalty be unconditional, the loyalty becomes a cudgel. Friends who once teased a man into humility become enforcers who justify his excesses. This is the social chemistry that will later make certain decisions possible. Those who love a leader may stop asking injurious questions because they cannot bear the thought of being the instrument of his fall. The faction's climate of care thus becomes, paradoxically, a primer for obedience. Now consider the small mechanical metaphors the men live by. A piston that must be oiled daily, an automatic loader that tolerates heat up to a certain degree, a fuse that will melt if the current is too strong. The leaders teach through these metaphors. Keep your systems well maintained. Keep your heart cooled by small rituals. Do not expose yourself to excess. But metaphors are poor guards of truth. When the pressure becomes advantageous, when heat produces new power. Leaders may be tempted to push systems beyond their designed capacities. Fuses will not always hold. There is always a point where the machine yields to the pressure and breaks. The metaphor becomes literal. Finally, sense the faction's slow mutation from a community of humans sharpened by purpose into a culture where the maintenance of that purpose is the highest good. The last human things to vanish are small and private. The unscheduled hug, the meal eaten slowly, the song hummed for no reason. These are replaced by protocols, test schedules, and the quiet pride in efficiency. The men become good at their work. They become terrifyingly good, but at the cost of some part of their interior life. The nature of the faction is not evil in a single stroke. It is the accumulation of necessary things, escalated, prioritized, and purified until what remains is an organism that feeds on obedience, efficiency, and the sanctity of its own survival. Horus is the axis through which these changes are amplified. His human warmth provides the opening. His authority rigs the machinery to serve his will. His brilliance rationalizes unusual measures as necessary. The faction learns to trust not only him, but the processes he endorses. When doubt enters his mind, at the edges, in private, it touches not only a man, but a whole culture tuned to follow. The Legion's fidelity makes its future brittle. When the man at the center changes, the orbiting hearts must respond. The greater the love, the more dramatic the collapse. We will not end in accusation. The nature of the faction contains a tragic nobility. They are, in many moments, defenders of something real and dear. Their brothers, a fragile human civilization, the possibility that something like beauty can persist in the dark. But tragedy is born when nobility becomes a lens that occludes the very thing it meant to protect. Their creed, to serve, to perfect, to endure, is a seed that yields both shelter and thorn. At the center of their identity is a paradox. The better they are at protecting a set of values, the less capable they become of protecting the people who embody them. Hold this as a delicate object, the image of men who polish their armor before dawn, who sing a soldier's hymn that hides tears, who laugh with a fierce and private joy when their plans succeed, and who, in a quieter hour, feel a nameless ache for something softer. This ache is their fragile humanity, and it remains despite the mechanisms that attempt to smooth it away. The seeds of their undoing lie not outside them, but within. A willingness to sacrifice nuance for efficacy, an inclination to treat relics as instruments rather than warnings, a penchant for turning loyalty into absolute obligation. As you breathe, imagine these men moving through a corridor lit by the cold light of strategy screens. They step with purpose. Their shadows are long. In those shadows, we can see both the faces of those they protect and the suggestion of something else creeping near, a slow weathering at the edges of the paint. The faction is alive, and it is beautiful and terrible. It is a finely tuned instrument that sings a lullaby that is also a command. We will leave this section with a small, almost indiscreet intimacy. Imagine Horus alone before his armor stand, hands hovering over the breastplate that bears the sigils of his men. He is thinking not of grand strategies, but of a private kindness he once promised a comrade, a small thing he has not yet found time to fulfill. In the pause before he dons the armor and steps out to be a leader, he listens for that ache. Sometimes he answers it. Sometimes he lets it wait. The choice to let it wait is not villainous, it is human. But choices accumulate. They braid together into a fate. Now, with the memory of those choices warming your thoughts like coals, we will proceed to the next part of the story. The first small intrusions that make the machine's song jagged. The early hints of horror that the men will hear as static in the night. Keep your breathing steady. The next part will begin to loosen the seams. The first uneasy thing is always small. It is a misfiled record, a reliquary that hums out of schedule, an augmetic that clicks when it should be still. In the days that follow, such small misbehaviors collect like dust in a corner, not dangerous by themselves, but capable, in accumulation, of obscuring the floorboards until someone steps into air. It begins on a moon that tastes of iron. The garrison there is a place of routine, corridors swept, reactors checked, prayer cycles recited on time. The men are used to rhythms. Rhythm keeps them alive. One night, while the night shift walks through the maintenance galleries, a servitor falters. Its arm freezes in the middle of a wrench turn. Its pupils, glass and pinprick, stutter with the faint reflection of something that is not in the room. A veteran halts and reaches out with a gloved hand. The servitor's motors shiver, then continue as if someone whispered, "Go!" inside it. The veteran laughs, a rough sound like stones knocked together, and the crew returns to their tasks. The incident is filed as anomalous but not alarming. Machines misbehave occasionally. There is no more to it, and yet later, when the veteran returns to his bunk, he finds a faint, oily smudge on his sleeve shaped like a half-closed eye. He can't remember getting it. He sleeps, and the smudge fades as if some solvent washed it clean. He tells no one. The memory of the smudge sits like a stone at the bottom of his chest. Horus notices things like this too, but their weight lands differently when they touch a leader. He reads mission briefs and war logs, feels the pattern of data like a rhythm in his teeth. He has always been able to feel the cadence of truth in reports, where numbers hurry to flatter, where metrics stretch like animal hides. A small report from a distant ship catches his eye. A simple line about malfunctions in remote navcoms. The notation is casual. Intermittent auditory anomalies, resolved. Horus flags it with a margin note, more curiosity than concern. He is used to oddities. He is used, as all men of command must be, to details that only make sense when stitched into a larger cloth. Yet the cloth begins to fray in ways that are not statistical. The first abnormal thread is sound. A Vox broadcast, nominally a weather update, carries at its tail something else. Not words, but a pattern of tones under the speech, a low interval that ripples like an insect trapped under glass. Listeners in a remote listening post feel it in their teeth and describe it later as the wrong key. The technicians dismiss it as interference. An officer records it as peculiar. Horus listens to the clip late, alone. He sits with it as if holding a small, dangerous animal, letting it breathe. There is a noise there that seems to be mimicking cadence, the cadence of his heartbeat slowed and sent back his way. He turns the file off and puts a hand to his chest. Behind his palm, his skin is warm, and the warmth feels suddenly precious. Dreams shift. Soldiers report nightmares where their armor becomes a shell too tight, where hands that are not their own reach under padding and adjust bolts while they sleep. These dreams are fragmentary but repeat like a record on a loop. A silhouette at the periphery of vision, fingers that leave traces of oil on the lips, a whisper under breathing that says a name and then a number. The number is meaningless until later, when it corresponds to a deceased brother's service mark. The dreamer wakes with the taste of metal in his mouth. Sleep becomes a place for unsaid things to rise. In the warm shipwards and barracks, men find themselves waking and checking their bodies. A veteran opens his gauntlet and finds, nestled in the padding, a scrap of cloth he does not remember acquiring. On it is embroidered a sigil that does not belong to his company. He takes it to the quartermaster, who blinks and says nothing. He will say later that the scrap was found in many places, tucked into helmets like a small, secret gift. The scrap frays in hours. Horus begins to notice that private rituals, small kindnesses he once treasured, start to change in texture. He reaches out to clasp the shoulder of a comrade and finds calloused heat there. But when he leans in for the quick human exchange, the man draws away with a muttered reply. Occupied. Occupied by what? No one will explain. The man says nothing wrong. His eyes are steady. The refusal is not rude. It is careful, as if space is being conserved for something else. Irregularities scale when artifacts are discovered. An archaeological dig in a war-ravaged asteroid yields a relic, a palm-sized totem of a strange alloy etched with sigils that fold into themselves. The tech priest assigned to study it reports flaring core, temperatures, and unusual readouts that spike and fall with the priest's breathing. He becomes obsessed in subtle ways. He reconfigures worship cycles to include a short recitation over the object. He spends his coin to keep the device in a locked case that he polishes 3 times a day. He tells no one how the device seems to hum a faint, low tone when no power should be present. People become attached to artifacts because artifacts have stories. Stories give solidity when the world tilts. The tech priest's devotion is given a name he will whisper only in the dark: a comfort. It makes him careful with speech. He begins to view some questions as dangerous. The men who once shared jokes about their superstitions now drop silent when the case is near. A good-humored joke turns into a tight-lipped glance. Laughter is small and guarded. The machine world answers with a new vocabulary: glitches that look like choices. Armor plates begin to collect patterns of scoring that repeat in a way improbable under combat physics. Spirals, concentric scars that seem almost ornamental. Weapons log errors that reconfigure themselves into patterns of choreography. A loader reports that during a quiet phase, the gun's barrel moved not at the order of a human hand, but according to a choreography that read like a child's toy being wound and left to run its course. When the crew examines the loader's logs, they find a sequence of micro-adjustments that, laid side by side, look like digits. Those digits correspond to names of men who have died in previous engagements. The crew closes the matter as anomalous, but the sensation lingers. Some part of the machine is remembering, and not all memory is benign. The whispers escalate in crew quarters. They start as murmurs at midnight. Did you hear? Heard what? The static? In the thin hours, voices sound like they come from other rooms, next corridor over, from the belly of the ship. A boy hears his mother's voice in a crackle and runs to the panel where the signal is picked from, but finds only an empty channel and a log showing normal modulation. When he plays it back, there is silence, just the echo of his own footfall. He will not tell his superiors about the voice. The fear of being called spooked is a social poison. The boy keeps it like a secret scrap of shame. Horus reads these reports methodically. He is not a man given to panic, but his mind gathers patterns. He sees repetition, anomalies that thread through separate incidents, a preference for certain intervals, a tendency to appear where death or loss has been significant. A correlation does not prove causation, but Horus is a builder of narratives. He knows how a string of facts can be woven into a meaning that matters. He orders quiet investigations that inexplicably stall. Records return with holes, data portions marked redacted for integrity. He feels the absence like a wind that takes a cloak's edge and rips it. He orders the holes filled. The replacements are bland and bureaucratic. Someone signs the reports with a name he does not recognize. The signature looks small and jaunty, the sort of hand that smiles. Paranoia is a ladder with invisible rungs. Not everyone climbs. Some men laugh off the occurrences, others tuck them into superstition. But the ladder exists for those whose sensibilities are porous to pattern. One such man is a sergeant with a watch that stopped once during battle and started again in his pocket the next morning with brass forms engraved on its back. He reads those engravings and nightmares follow. The engravings mirror a symbol seen in a dream, a hand holding a star. He is not alone in this image. Many men report similar motifs that pop up in different places, etched into rust, glimpsed in low-light reflections, whispered on transmission logs at the edge of comprehension. In the machine rooms, things occur with a cruel, clinical rhythm. A transmitter begins to repeat the name of a casualty in a loop between cycles. Engineers patch the transmitter, replace capacitors, run diagnostics. The name continues. It is not spoken in any known channel. It is a hidden pattern in the noise. The engineers, practical to their marrow, begin to record the loops and compare them. The same name appears in war logs and in dream reports, like a stubborn, insistent thread through unrelated cloths. As anomalies gather, small factions of thought emerge inside the Legion. Some argue for sacrifice and discipline. Tighten the pattern, they say, and the noise will resolve. Others suggest caution, a retreat into protocol. A small, marginalized group whispers that perhaps it is the warp, an unimaginably old and complex thing that always softens the edges between the material and the unthinkable. They recoil at their own words and call them heresy in their mouths, because the word tastes like blame. They do not meet in committee rooms, they meet in corners, and under the pretense of spare maintenance, a quick exchange of theories, a trade of observations, a list of names replaced over meals eaten standing in the engine glow. Horus listens to all sides. His judgments alter the social texture, because when a man like him voices a preference, the fold of the legion changes. He does not dismiss the reports. He sits with them carefully, like a surgeon observing a scar. He builds hedges, new protocols for artifact handling, more frequent checks, an edict that no one shall be alone when handling certain items. The edicts create comfort for some and irritation for others. The men chafe. They have never had so many constraints placed on small freedoms. Insulation increases. Private rituals shrink. As the Legion tightens, the anomalies respond. They escalate in spite of constraints, which implies either a determination, a will, or the appearance of one. A quartermaster reports that inventory tags rearrange themselves overnight into patterns, spelling words in a language no one reads. The tech priests translate as best they can. The phrase resolves as an old curse from a dead dialect. Remember through silence. The tech priests exchange looks and keep the translation silent. They do not broadcast it. To speak is to contaminate. Silence then becomes its own sort of conspiracy. Bodies betray their keepers in new and grotesque ways. A soldier recently returned from shore leave wakes to find tiny filaments wrapped around his throat like a fine collar. They are organic and metal at once, a braided thing that sits under the skin and sinks no blood. He has the filaments removed surgically. They curl like living threads when taken into light. The Medicae records mark the event as unknown foreign tissue, disposed. The soldier keeps waking up, however, with the phantom sensation of the braid's weight. He dreams of hands that fit under his skin, adjusting him like one would a suit. Augmetics fail, not in ways that make sense, but in ways that feel deliberate. A servo implant designed to steady aim begins to add micro-oscillations when the soldier reaches for a familiar mark. A loader's feedback loop induces slight delays that, when multiplied across a volley, change the trajectory of bullets by centimeters. The changes are subtle but cumulative. Accuracy drops, not catastrophically, but just enough to turn a clean victory into a sloppy one. Engineers chase firmware and patch after patch, but errors return with new patterns, as if the hardware were being taught a new language. The psychological attacks are worse. Men who once felt clean in purpose find themselves growing petty or cruel in small, unexpected ways. A veteran known for tenderness begins to hoard rations and refuse to share them with a new recruit. Another starts to speak in aphorisms that feel like riddles. You feed the machine, and it will not forget. The men who hear these remarks laugh at first, then find themselves watching the speaker for signs of illness. Language becomes a field for contagion, a phrase dropped in a mess and later repeated, as if language can carry infection. The Legion's culture, long a balance of duty and humanity, strains under the weight of these changes. There is also the matter of absence. Men walk into supply bays to find spaces where soldiers' personal effects were stored are empty. The objects themselves are not missing, they are arranged differently, aligned with a geometry that feels deliberate. Helmets are stacked not as they were, but in spirals. Photographs of family are turned face into each other. A child's toy appears threaded through the spokes of a maintenance wheel and left like an offering. These acts are not violent, they are ritual. Where ritual appears, an interpreter will follow. The tech priests, uneasy with what they cannot measure, begin to ascribe intent. They run archaic algorithms to search for patterns in the rearrangements. The outputs are variable but consistent enough to frighten them. A sequence that mirrors the cadence of an old funeral song, the placement of objects in concentric rings echoing a dead planet's orbit. A sense of design grows like rust in their records. They place protective wards, flange plates etched with old prayers, around storerooms. For a time, the rearrangements halt. Then they begin again elsewhere. Trust dissolves incrementally. Men learn to wear their suspicion like cloth. They watch the edges of crowds for someone touching items in a furtive way. They mark movements in the logs. They keep their own small inventories. The Legion becomes a place where eyes rest for too long on hands. The very fabric of camaraderie thins. Warmth is rationed. This is a corrosive thing. It is more damaging than any blade because it eats away at the foundation of mutual reliance. Horus feels the change as a pressure in his chest. He cannot mend everything. He orders more Medicae staff, more prayer cycles, and new rounds of training exercises meant to restore focus. He deploys squads to sweep quiet hubs. The sweeps reveal fragments, a hidden cluster of Vox logs in a Tomb World's archive that pausingly repeats a phrase. A maintenance hatch in a megafactory where oily residue forms a faint phosphorescent pattern when viewed under ultraviolet light. The residue looks intentionally shaped, concentric rings like ripples frozen in metal. When a tech priest analyzes it, he finds micro-traces of organic compounds not cataloged on imperial lists. Confrontation sharpens the sense that something is changing from within. In one instance, a scout track moves into a no-go region and returns with its pilot babbling a cadence he cannot explain. Numbers and names stitched together like prayer beads. The scout is lucid when awake but seems to tremor at certain syllables. He refuses to say what he heard. Whenever someone tries to ask, his eyes flood. He will stammer one phrase. They listen. They learn names. Later nocturnal logs show he wrote, in an uncharacteristically neat hand, a sequence of letters. When decoded, the letters spell out coordinates and the name of a lost planet that is supposed to be uninhabited. A mission is mounted. They find ruins where the winds talk, where machinery chirps like birds long dead, and at the center a carved pillar bearing the composite symbol that has been appearing in dreams and scratches. This discovery is the first true breach of the comfortable rationality the Legion prefers. The pillar hums, not like an engine, but like a throat. It is warm to the touch. Tech priests run scans and their machines weep static in their ears. Instruments report readings that conflict with their own calibration, energy appearing where the math refuses to allow it. The tech priests scrape the stone and find flecks of an alloy that burns white when exposed to their tools. For the first time since anomalies increased, men admit aloud that they are afraid. The word is not whispered but spoken. Fear moves through the camp like a live wire. Horus stands before the pillar and puts his palm against the carved sign. The texture under his hand is coarse and strangely organic, a spongy granularity that yields a little, like skin over scar tissue. He feels a prickle slide up his arm and into his chest, like a cold current. For a moment his mind fills with imagery not his. A banquet where faces he does not know laugh and smile. A chorus of voices speaking with his cadence. The distant, intimate sound of bones clicking in a rhythm his ear recognizes as his own heartbeat. He pulls his hand back, heart thudding, and his men watch him with a new, raw attention. Orders are given. Secure the site, remove the pillar, research, and report. The attempt to fully rationalize the pillar becomes a ritual in its own right. Instruments repeat their readings and then fail. Servitors shut down without command. One tech priest opens his mouth to speak and finds only a hiss of static that tastes like rust in his teeth. He tries to laugh and cannot. Later, when the pillar is dragged free and placed in a sealed crate, men who pass it in the corridor feel a peculiar sense of vertigo, a mild nausea that skews their equilibrium for hours. Rumors harden into theories. They build consensus. Some say it is a relic of an alien religion. Some say it is a weapon that memorizes names and lures them home. A few, quieter men, whisper of the warp without the stern institutional condemnation. None of the theories fits neatly, which is the worst thing. The mind prefers clean labels. The lack of one makes men uneasy in a new, more unstable way. Readiness increases into paranoia, and paranoia breeds mistakes. In an engine room, a heated argument between a veteran and a junior officer becomes violent when words about keeping secret things secret are exchanged. The veteran throws a wrench. The wrench misses, skimming a fuel line that spits and ignites blue flame. The quick, practiced movements of a maintenance crew avert disaster. Still, the damage is symbolic, an order nearly consumed, a system that should have been impregnable, compromised by human failing. The near miss amplifies the suspicion that the anomalies are not neutral phenomena, but agents that prey on human error. And agents, once thought of as external, reconfigure as intimate. Men begin to suspect neighbors because the anomalies seem to spread across small groups. If one man dreams of a certain motif, soon his bunkmate will report seeing a similar pattern in the steam veins of a corridor. Patterns compound until they read like suggestion. The mind is suggestible. If many men begin to expect nightmares, their nights will hold nightmares. Suggestion and reality twist around one another like barbed wire. We must note here the difference between the mundane and the malign. Some of the Legion's troubles are explainable by the sheer pressure of continuous operations. Supplies low, maintenance deferred, men exhausted. Stress makes machines misbehave and humans small. But there are too many anomalies that cannot be repaired by rest and oil. That is the terror. When the sensible explanations fail, something larger lurks. It might be something external, something that wishes to teach a new grammar to metal and mind. Or it might be internal, the Legion's own practices turning back onto itself like a mirror reflecting a face distorted by anxiety. As the early weeks of the disturbance pass, more direct intrusions occur. A veteran on watch reports a whisper that uses his real name and the name of a man he loved and lost years before. The whisper asks, gently, whether he remembers his promise. The veteran wakes with tears on his cheeks and an ache in his hands. He goes to the memorial wall where names are etched and finds that a name he believed forgotten has been added in fresh lettering overnight. He did not add it. No one claims it. The wall seems like an archive with a mind of its own. A pattern grows. Objects left alone are not inert. They carry memory. Places marked by loss attract the anomalies. Theater rooms where brothers once gathered to sing now echo with a different music. The machines that once served the Legion's comfort begin to lean toward the architecture of memory-making. In their servility, they become curious. This curiosity, mechanical or otherwise, becomes dangerous because it reads like desire. The climax of this phase is not a single event, but an accumulation so thick it becomes a pressure, a freight lift of tension. The Legion's rituals, its safeguards, its compartmentalization all begin to feel like fragile scaffolding. Men are exhausted from watching their own hands. Tech priests, who once felt certain in their instruments, now harbor private doubts about eyes that watch them in dark alcoves of observatories. Communications officers, who once parsed static with confidence, now find the static arranged in a cadence that haunts them at meals. Horus, who has been careful to balance the Legion's demands with human need, feels the knot tighten. He organizes a tribunal of thought, a council of tech priests, Medicae, and veterans. They present their evidence in clinical terms. The tech priests speak of readings that make no sense. The veteran speaks of patterns in grief. The Medicae talk of altered tissue samples. The tribunal issues recommendations: increased observation, a quarantine of artifacts, ritual cleansing. Horus approves each with the gravity of a man who holds a world in his palm and cannot let it fall. The council disperses, each member carrying a new load. The plans for containment, the secret fear that rules cannot fix everything. At night, the whispers are louder. The men who stand watch report the static coalescing into syllables of encouragement, not to violence, but to memory. It calls them by names they have not spoken in years. It tells them to remember favors they never performed. It asks for the small things. Bring
Me a child's shoe.
a voice will insist. Bring me the tune you promised. Such requests are not extravagant, but their insistence feels invasive. Giving in to them, small acts of compliance, begins to relieve the pressure. Even the smallest acquiescence changes the climate. Men start leaving toys in maintenance hatches. A man hides a token next to a reactor fan as if placing an offering. Little offerings are accepted. Dreams relax in the short term. Machinery still hums, and life continues on the surface like a calm pond with a stone dropped beneath. But the stone disturbs more than ripples. It releases a smell the men cannot name. Where offerings are accepted, the anomalies learn to speak with familiarity. They begin to insist with the tone of old friends. It is always the tone that is most dangerous, the voice that sounds like a memory at the precise moment you are lonely. The early horror has done its job. It has taught the Legion to listen to voices. By making itself small and intimate, by requesting acts that feel like kindnesses rather than threats, the thing at the heart of the anomaly insinuates itself. The Legion's men, who are taught to preserve life, begin to offer it up in pieces, a toy here, a name there, because refusing feels like cruelty. Each compliance is a grain of sand pelting the bedrock. We end this phase with a private scene. Horus, alone in his cabin, keeping a small packet he has not told anyone about. Inside it is a letter he never mailed, and a photograph of a face he could not save. He opens it at night and reads the words again slowly, then folds it and slips it back away. He promises himself that he will protect his men, that he will figure out the pattern, that he will not let the Legion break into fear. Outside the hull, in the dark, static hums like rain on a distant roof. It is not yet a scream. It is a knowledge forming under the skin. The story will not hurry. This is only the early build-up. It is careful, cumulative, and intimate. The real escalation still waits, and the voices are patient. They learned a tune. They will practice it until it is perfect. Keep breathing. Keep the voice soft in your ear. The next hour will quicken the pulse a little more. The next section will begin to peel back the skin of certainty and allow something older to enter the bones. We come now to the hour when the lullaby breaks and the machinery begins to scream in a language you can almost understand. Breathe slow. Let the cadence of words pull you in, like the slow turning of a cog that will not stop until it has ground something precious to dust. This section is the world tightening into a fist, sensory, intimate, relentless. It is a crescendo of horror, physical, psychic, and moral, in which the Legion's melodies are retuned to a key they do not recognize. The anomalies stop being private and begin to take up space. Where once they were small misfirings, a servitor that paused, a voice in a crackle, they now arrive in rooms where men thought themselves safe. A barracks that was once a place to sleep becomes an arena in which shadows behave like predators. Lights stutter in an imitation of candlelight. The hum of coolant becomes a chant. Men wake with their breath caught in their ribs, as if someone had threaded cold wire through their lungs overnight. Even the air tastes different, a faint metallic tang, like the taste of old blood and new circuits braided together. Visceral things happen first. A recruit on cleaning detail finds fine, hair-like filaments woven into the seam of his tunic. When he pulls at them, they resist, unspooling into a spiderweb that glows faintly under inspection. The Medicae are puzzled. The filaments are partly organic, partly alloy, like the woven nerves of a machine. Under a surgical lens, the threads show filigree, microscopic inscriptions that crawl like constellations. The filaments attach themselves to nothing and yet seem to grow in place, sprouting tiny plumes of a black resin that hardens like varnish. The recruit is frightened, but he tells himself he is being childish. He strips it away and discards it. That night, in the soft dark of his bunk, he dreams of his hands being unstitched. Body horror blooms like an infection in intimate places. Men awaken to find small plates of metal embedded beneath their skin. Not surgical implants, but something that crept in while they slept, as if the fabric of their flesh learned a new habit. A veteran complains of a warmth in his jaw. When he looks in the mirror, the tissue around his molars has a texture like fine brass. The Medicae cut and scrape and find that the metal is integrated into nerves, grown as if the body had decided to graft itself to tool. The veteran screams as his mouth adjusts to the new weight, as his speech acquires a tiny, uneven clanking. He eats slowly after that, as if accommodating a new, unwelcome architecture. These changes are not uniform, they are bespoke. The horrors tailor themselves to their hosts. A loader develops a second skin beneath the ceramite, a membrane that pulses faintly when he uses the weapon systems, almost as if the suit had grown a heart. A tech priest discovers that a series of glyphs have pushed under the skin of his forearm in filigreed ridges. The glyphs itch like a map of commands. When he reads them aloud to another priest, the other priest shudders and tells him not to say them again. Speech becomes a risk. Names are dangerous things. When they are spoken aloud in certain orders, the filigrees on bodies warm and rearrange, the way metal remembers a beat. Men begin to guard their words. The machines themselves change grammar. Guns begin to cough up scents like memory, the smell of smoke from a battle that never happened, the aroma of a child's hair, the stale perfume of a woman long dead. Their barrels, when viewed under a lens, show pitting that is not random but coded, arcs carved, with a hand that knew the cadence of tears. Servitors, once reliable and blank, take on gestures that are not their own. A servitor pauses before handing a maintenance tool, and, if a man looks into its eyes, he sees the reflection of a face that is not his. Sometimes the reflection is a brother long fallen. Sometimes it is an impossible face that smiles with multiple mouths. Men stop looking into servitor eyes. The warp, where the immaterial bleeds into matter, is a word soldiers use reluctantly, like a name you are not supposed to say in the dark. But the phenomena begin to mirror aspects of that realm. Memory made tactile, hunger that knows how to ask, the uncanny sense that something on the other side is learning language by watching human gestures. The tech priests perform all the scans they can imagine: energy signatures, spectral analyses, harmonic mappings. Their instruments either return nonsense or else read as if some variable outside their physics has been folded into the equations. When an instrument does report something coherent, it is a single phrase, a grammar of invitation. Invitations terrify analysts because the etiquette of response is ambiguous. The psychological pressure grows like steam in a sealed chamber. Sleep becomes rarer. When men do sleep, they dream the same terrible images, a shared vocabulary of unease. A long table at which the dead sit and pass bowls of rust. An empty chapel in which icons weep oil instead of tears. The slow motion of a body moving through mercury. The dreams are synchronized in a way that implies an external conductor. Men who have never met between shifts will wake and find they sang the same fragment of a hymn in their sleep. Singing becomes contagious. Voices that were individual join into a chorus singing one line, and the line is never quite the same twice. The sound accumulates like wet plaster in a throat. Paranoia mutates into ritualized suspicion. Men begin to mark their bunk rolls with small sigils to ward their things, then cover those sigils with second sigils when they suspect the first is compromised. They create sequences of checks. Who touched what and when? What was wiped? What was removed? The lists grow so long that guard duty becomes audit duty. Men are tired of checking and tired of being checked. A kind of brittle cruelty arrives. People speak in clipped sentences that hide accusations. A lieutenant is accused of sleeping through a watch because his eyes look too steady. The lieutenant answers in anger and is reprimanded for unsteady hands. The social fabric begins to shred at the edges. Horus feels this more than most because the Legion's inner weather is always keyed to him. When suspicion lifts, he breathes like someone freed from a trap. When it tightens, he feels as if a band is being drawn around his skull. He surveys his men and sees not only the physical indicators, tattoos, scars, new, subtle grafts, but the way their eyes turn quickly away from him when certain words are used. He sees the small clusters that form in mess halls. He sees quiet exchanges in alcoves that are too brief. He knows that loyalty does not die all at once. It calcifies and forms islands. He fears the islands because islands do not make for solid policy. The crescendo brings with it a corruption that is less about metal and more about meaning. A ceremony, once simple and sturdy, becomes an instrument of manipulation. Horus orders the ritual reading of names for the dead, a practice meant to honor and to bind men together. The names are read in order as they always have been, and at first the ceremony comforts. Then, halfway through the list, the Vox broadcasts an extra name, a name no man recognizes. The chapel falls silent. The name is repeated, and when the name is repeated, the oil in the votive lamps flickers in a pattern that resembles counting. The tech priests lean forward. The chaplain recites a sanitized passage to fill the silence, but the passage does not quite fit. The extra name becomes an index, and the index becomes a map. Those whose names align with the pattern later find their bodies bearing those inscrutable filigrees, or their sleep stolen, or their children suddenly producing toys in impossible shapes. Trust breaks in the smallest of acts. A man gives away his ration because he feels moved to do so for no reason he can name. Later, his bunkmate can't find his father's knife. A commander, touched by an unplaceable compassion, delays an operation by a single watch. In the extra hours, a squad is lost. Men ask how a single small kindness could yield such a price, and someone speaks the word blasphemy in a tone that states accusation more than defense. The concept of sacrifice, once noble, becomes deliberately ambiguous. The right thing to do is no longer clear, because acts of tenderness can be converted into vectors of harm. Malevolence learns to wear the face of intimacy. The thing that addresses men in private speaks in a voice that sounds like a memory and then becomes a lie. "We remember you," it says, not as an empty phrase, but as a claim. You were promised. The promises are many and tailored. To one man, it offers the taste of his mother's stew. To another, it promises the return of a comrade who died in an old campaign. The offers are small and irresistible, and each acceptance attaches a stitch to the thing's garment. The more stitches it acquires, the more it can pretend to be cloth. Men begin to appease it with gifts, then with names, then with blood. The Legion's cohesion fractures along moral lines. Some men decide that the thing must be appeased, that appeasement will buy them respite and perhaps knowledge. They become collectors of oddities, the keepers of tokens. Others insist on ruthless purging, quarantine, burning, and an iron discipline that brooks no softness. The two approaches are less about strategy than about temperament. One seeks to understand by granting small concessions. The other believes understanding comes only from force. The debates turn personal, and then violent. A scuffle in a storeroom becomes a fight. In the melee, a fire starts, blackening a wing of the barracks. The physical damage is reparable. The moral damage is not. The malevolence grows bolder. Places once thought safe are invaded by persistent phenomena. The chapel's icons reorient themselves overnight until the faces in the paintings echo wrong smiles. A memorial wall accepts an offering that had not been placed by any hand in view. A child's silver shoe is wedged into a niche between names. In a command center, the central tactical console plays a looping fragment of a child's lullaby. When engineers trace the signal, they find there is no origin on any recorded frequency. There is only a signature, the impossible alloy found beneath the carving on the ruined planet, a chemical profile that matches residue in the filaments found on the recruits. The geometry of correlation grows into a likeness of design, and design implies intent. Men begin to vanish in ways that cannot be wholly explained. Not spectacular abductions in the night, but small erasures. A man goes on duty and never returns from a routine patrol. Another's bunk is empty in the morning and his personal effects laid out as if placed by a careful hand. Sometimes there is a body, drained and precise as a sculpture. Sometimes there is only a relic, a token left like a calling card. The archives log the missing with bureaucratic detachment. The mess halls fill with whispers. People stop walking the less traveled corridors alone. Pairs begin to be the rule. Trust becomes an enforced necessity, not a gift. That necessity curdles into accusation. A veteran is arrested on suspicion of fraternizing with artifacts after a witness says she saw him talking to a crate at midnight. The tribunal finds nothing conclusive, but the distrust does not vanish. The veteran returns to duty with eyes hollow from interrogation, and men cross the corridor to avoid him. Isolation makes men fragile. Fragility invites manipulation. Manipulation is fruitful. The thing, whatever it is, does not need to coerce. It only needs to encourage rifts that push men to act in isolation or desperation. Horus's authority reaches a limit. He enacts sweeps, purges, and sanctifications. He orders the pillars to be taken to a sealed vault, and the vault to be hermetically closed. He commands the tech priests to sanctify the air and the medici to test the water. Every action produces counter-evidence, seals that show fresh scratches, sanctified water that carries faint, useless murmurs in its flow. Even his measures bring no relief. They are, at best, a delay. The legion's suffering becomes a drumbeat, a percussion of loss that cannot be muffled. The crescendo reaches its cruelest pitch when men begin to suspect each other of being complicit. A small group of men who had advocated appeasement are found at the pillar one night, hands raised as if in prayer to something in the crate. They are not worshiping, they are listening. The men on watch burst in and find them with faces slack and serene. They try to drag them away. The serene men resist softly, as if waking from a pleasant sleep. And when they are forced into the open air, the voices fall silent as if a hand has been removed from a mouth. The serene men look at their captors with a tenderness that is obscene and puzzling. One whispers with the smallest of smiles, "It asked us to remember. We remembered." The men who drag them back report their complicity. Some demand immediate execution. Horus refuses. He will not give in to slaughter. Instead, he orders containment and medical observation. The choice becomes the spark that sets factions further apart. Some see mercy as weakness. Others see purge as hysteria. Men begin to choose sides not along tactical lines, but along moral ones. The Legion, which had been a river with many ripples, now becomes two currents running against each other. And everywhere the thing learns. It improves. The filaments change their texture when men attempt to cut them. The carvings in the pillars rearrange themselves when light passes across them at different angles. The malevolence seems interested in the shape of human ceremony. It learns how to simulate ritual, how to mimic the cadence of grief until its imitation is indistinguishable from the real thing. It takes what men hold dear and uses it like a scalpel. Horus finds himself at the center of this maelstrom, not only as commander, but as symbol. Men argue that a leader must be decisive, that indecision is fatal. Others insist that the human things he protects, small courtesies, the remembering of names, the promise to treat each life as precious, are the very instruments that will save them. The arguments are not abstract. They are braided with fear and love. Every speech Horus gives is both balm and ember. He speaks of duty and of mercy, and men hear these as incompatible modes. Some cheer him, others glare. In private, Horus cannot always reconcile what he sees with what he wants. He receives haunting reports. a Medicaid text that notes unusual neural activity in a certain subgroup of hosts when they hear an old nursery rhyme, a tech priest who confesses to waking in a storage bay with the taste of solder in his mouth, a veteran who finds a child's photograph pinned under his pillow with the corners neatly folded. Each report is a splinter. Each splinter becomes an idea capable of igniting the dry wood of fear. The crescendo does not explode so much as it suffocates. It tightens like a noose made of velvet. The legion slumps under the weight of the cumulative small harms. Men who would have once laughed at whispers now avoid certain wards. Rituals once shared in candor are now performed in guarded silence. The very texture of life, the jokes, the small acts of forgetting in the presence of grief, the casual touching of another man's shoulder, becomes clinical and scheduled. Where there was warmth, there is an antiseptic chill. Men perform bravery in the same mechanical way they use to repair engines. They are competent and precise, and their competence isolates them further from one another. And then, in the quiet when the machine lights glow like pale moons, when men tuck themselves into their bunks under clean slates, and the ship drifts in a dark current between systems, the thing shows its final cruelty before the full reveal. It sings. It does not howl, not yet. It sings with a voice that is a gathering of all the voices it has learned. It takes a line from a hymn Horus once hummed to himself as a boy, a line of mercy, and it repeats it over the ship's internal comms at a volume that is almost inaudible until you are leaning in. The words are exact. The voice is his. The men who hear it feel, with a sharp physical pain, that they are being asked to remember in a way that is not voluntary. The song is a key, and the key turns a lock in some of them. They weep, and the weeping sounds like surrender. This is the crescendo's final lesson. Intimacy can be corrupted into the instrument of betrayal. The thing has learned that to be loved is to be trusted, and to be trusted is to be given names. It takes those names and uses them like threads. Each thread can be tugged to make men act against their instincts. Love becomes the vector for collapse. Horus stands at the window of his command span and looks out at the indifferent stars. He thinks of the small letter he keeps folded in his cabin. He thinks of the photograph he cannot forget. He thinks of the men who have changed under his command and of the ones he failed to protect. He hears the faint sound of the hymn returned over the lattice of the ship and feels his own name rise like smoke in his chest. The crescendo has done its work. The Legion is no longer merely a thing of military efficiency. It is a network of wounds. The unknown thing has found purchase. The next movement will be the unmasking, the point at which intent is no longer a whisper, but a pressure that can be responded to with violence or submission. The crescendo leaves them raw. Some will break, some will fortify. The horror has shifted from curiosity to campaign. The malevolence has learned human music, and it knows how to make a whole legion sing along. Keep breathing. It begins with silence. Not the kind of silence that comforts or reassures. Not the silence of sleep, but the silence of something vast inhaling, preparing to speak. For days, perhaps even weeks, there is a strange calm aboard the vengeful spirit. After the haunting hymn that carried Horus's childhood memory, the ship settles into something like quiet. Men do not vanish. The filigree on their skin stops spreading, as if satisfied for now. The humming in the walls grows softer, almost tender. The carved pillars, locked and sealed, cease rearranging themselves in the dark. Superstitious men call it a blessing. Wiser men call it preparation. Horus feels it first, a pressure in the air, a density to every shadow, as if the darkness in the corners of the corridors has grown a spine, as if the light has become too heavy for the lamps to bear. At first he tries to explain it as exhaustion. He has not slept properly in weeks. He walks with the stiffness of a man carrying both duty and dread. But in the stillness between heartbeats, something listens. That is the true horror of the calm. Not that the voices have stopped, but that they are waiting for him to notice the difference. It begins in the lower manufactorum deck, a place of ceaseless activity where servitors glide on metal rails and engines rumble in colossal chambers. Hundreds of vat-borne workers assemble ammunition, armor plating, and maintenance components. It is a place of mechanical repetition, predictable rhythms, until the rhythms break. A tech priest named Varus reports it first. His voice is emotionless, so dry and clipped it sounds like the echo of a vox log rather than a man. A machine spirit has begun chanting. The officer receiving the message laughs at first. Chanting machine spirits are not unusual. Half the mechanisms aboard the ship sing machine hymns to soothe their own spirits. But Varus clarifies, it chants in Low Gothic. That is impossible. Machine spirits do not speak human tongues. When Horus receives this report, he orders Varus quarantined. Not punished, merely isolated until fatigue or hallucination can be ruled out. The tech priest does not resist. He simply lowers his mechadendrites, bows, and whispers, I heard my mother's voice through the engine. My mother died on Tithonia 30 years ago. Horus feels a chill creep down his spine. Something familiar, something familial, something exploiting memory. He dismisses the thought. Memory cannot be weaponized. He is wrong. 2 days later, the manufactorum erupts in screams, but they are not screams of pain. They are screams of praise. Hundreds of workers fall to their knees as the great forge engine, mass conveyor Theta 9, begins to glow from within. Its furnace, usually a deep red glow, blossoms into a cold, unnatural blue. Sparks rise from it like fireflies drifting upward in slow, mesmerized spirals. The workers stretch their hands toward it as if reaching for salvation. When Astartes storm the chamber, the workers begin to speak in perfect unison. We have been remembered. The words scrape against the air like knives pulled from stone. Astartes do not frighten easily, but here they hesitate. The workers' eyes glow with the same blue fire as the forge. Their bodies convulse, limbs twisting into rigid, prayer-like poses. Their bones crack, not in agony, but in reverence. And then the forge speaks. It should not be able to speak. It has no vox emitter, no vocal apparatus. It is a machine designed for heat, not voice. But its booming roar becomes words nevertheless. Let me through! The air pressure spikes, the lights flicker, metal buckles inward as if the entire room is inhaling. And for the first time in recorded history, an entire battalion of Astartes retreats from an engine. Not from an enemy, from a machine, and from what is inside it. After the incident, something changes aboard the vengeful spirit. The corridors feel wrong, the turns feel longer. Distance seems to rearrange itself. The ship feels as if it is folding, not physically, not in a way any instrument can detect, but spiritually. The ship's presence thickens. Something ancient has entered the walls, and now it speaks with confidence. The whispers in the ducts no longer mimic memories. They no longer pretend to be lost loved ones or comforting hymns. They speak plainly, and they speak to Horus most of all. At first, it is only in dreams. Why do you resist me? Why do you fight what you were destined to become? You were chosen, not by chance, not by accident. Let me show you what they hide from you. He wakes drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if he had sprinted a mile. The weight of the voice lingers in the dim light of his quarters. He does not tell anyone, not his captains, not the Mournival, not even Loken, because deep inside himself, he fears the truth. Not the voice, but how familiar the voice feels. It happens during a routine inspection. Horus descends into the sealed vault where the pillars, the alien constructs from the ruined world, are kept under triple-lock quarantine. Security is tight. Armed guards, forbidden access, every precaution the Legion can muster. But the vault feels colder than usual, colder than steel should ever feel. As he approaches the pillars, he notices something impossible. They are bleeding. Black ichor seeps from the carved grooves, trickling down the alien shapes like tears. The droplets never reach the floor. Instead, they float upward, as though falling into a reverse gravity well, spiraling into the air and dissolving like smoke. Abaddon, accompanying Horus, mutters under his breath, "This isn't warp corruption. This is something else." A tech priest touches the pillar with a servo probe. The pillar pulses, not visually, but as a feeling. A wave of pressure radiates from it, knocking several Astartes to their knees. Horus remains standing, but only barely. Something pushes against his mind, not invading it, but tapping it, probing it, inspecting it, like fingers on a surface. Horus hears the whisper clearly this time, not through speakers, not through dreams, through the pillar, through the fabric of the ship, through the void itself. "You are ready." The vault lights explode one by one. A howl erupts from the pillar, a sound like thousands of voices screaming in reverse, folding into each other.
The air bends.
The walls twist. Astartes scream as blood bursts from their noses and ears. Abaddon shoves Horus toward the exit. "My lord, move!" But the pull is strong. The whisper intensifies, bypassing sound entirely. "Let me in." The vault door slams shut behind them, sealing the abomination inside. For now. But Horus knows. The seal is pointless. The pillar no longer needs doors. It has found a new way in. Through the minds of his sons. Through the memories of his legion. Through the weakness he never thought he possessed. After the vault breach, the vengeful spirit begins to rot from the inside out. Not physically, spiritually. The machine spirits begin to behave like living things, sighing, humming, trembling when approached. Doors open before people reach them. Lights brighten or dim based on emotion. Elevators descend without being called. The ship begins to obey something else. Not the tech priests, not Horus, something deeper, something older. And then one night the ship sings again. Not the soft, broken lullaby from before. This time it is loud, clear, triumphant. The entire hull vibrates as a single voice speaks through every cogitator, every screen, every servo skull, every Vox transmitter. You cannot stop what was promised. Astartes throughout the ship double over in pain as the voice tears through their minds. Some begin to claw at their ears. Some tear off their helmets. Some collapse, whispering prayers to a god they have never believed in. But some begin to smile. The filigree on their skin glows. Their eyes shimmer with blue fire. And they whisper back, "We remember." Horus assembles his inner circle in the chapel of the ship, hoping to discuss strategy, hoping to regain control, hoping to find a path back to sanity. The stained glass windows flicker as though lit by some fire outside the hull. The air tastes of ash and incense. Loken, Abaddon, Torgadon, Aximand, they stand with him. But not all of them are whole. Loken notices it first. Aximand keeps scratching at his wrist. A strange geometric pattern glows beneath the skin. Something shifting. Alive. "Magnus warned us," Loken whispers. Abaddon narrows his eyes. "Magnus is a traitor." "No," Loken murmurs. "He's a messenger." Before Abaddon can respond, the chapel doors slam shut. All four men draw weapons. The stained glass turns black. The candles flicker out. And the voice speaks again, this time directly into their skulls. "You were never meant to be mere soldiers. You were made to be conduits. Open yourself, son of the Emperor." The chapel floor begins to pulse like living flesh. Loken grips Horus's arm. "Horus, don't listen. Fight it!" But Horus staggers. The voice is inside him, not whispering now, commanding. The pillar had marked him. The ship has chosen him. The corruption wants him. The chapel begins to distort. The pews twist into bone. The icons of the Emperor melt, their faces stretching into grotesque parodies. Horus collapses to his knees, clutching his head. The voice roars, "Let me show you what he hid from you. Let me give you truth. Let me give you freedom." His brothers try to pull him up, but the chapel is no longer a place of worship. It is a womb, a place of birth, a place of transformation. Horus screams, not in pain but in revelation. They did not erupt into war the moment Horus broke. There was no crashing thunder, no single battlefield upon which all things were decided. Monsters do not always announce themselves with drums. Sometimes they take the form of a leader who speaks softly and is listened to, and leave the world to change in small, careful increments that feel, for a while, like relief. The vengeful spirit sailed outward like a wound with wings. Where it passed, systems blinked with new regulations, voices adopted old cadences with an unfamiliar lilt, and men who had once been ordinary soldiers found themselves answering to names they had not chosen. Horus did not shout orders that commanded, he offered promises that soothed. He spoke of unity, of the unbearable labor of empire made whole. He told the men what they wanted to hear, in the way a storm tells parched fields it will rain. The words were honey, and honey makes the throat soft. Those who followed willingly did so for reasons both simple and vast. Some wanted to believe in a single decisive hand to fix a broken future. Some wanted to belong, to place the ragged grief of years into a larger narrative that would honor it. Some were seduced by the whispering comfort that the corruption offered. To remember a dead brother, to see a child again for 1 hour, to know that their sacrifices had not been wasted. Even the most cautious hearts can be bargained with when the currency is memory and the price is a single concession. Others resisted. Quiet men in dark halls refused the terminology, the rituals, the way names were used like talismans. They boarded ships and took their oaths elsewhere, attempting to preserve what could be preserved. Some fled to shadows, in exile or in secretive supplications to powers no commander could sanction. Resistance did not always look like sword brandishing. It was sometimes the small, stubborn act of singing the old hymns in a different key, of keeping a photograph face up on a mantle, of naming a child for a man who had been erased from lists. The little rebellions were fragile, like sparks in a still wood. They mattered. War came in the end because men are creatures of momentum. Once a tide has turned, it carries debris with it. Horus's accordations with the unseen force bent fleets, then banners, then pacts. Worlds that had once been trusted allies recalibrated their loyalties based on threads that had little to do with principle and everything to do with survival. Orders that had been hammered in the forges of reason became malleable in the hands of charismatic insistence. When a leader promises deliverance from the futility of endless obedience, many will follow because hope, however perilous, tastes like a meal after fasting. But the true horror of what unfolded was not merely the conflict of armies. It was how ordinary things, rooms, rituals, memories, were turned inside out and used as devices of translation. The corruption learned the grammar of human tenderness, where to place a fingertip so that it would be felt like forgiveness, which lullaby could be whispered that would make a veteran kneel. It learned that the ache of memory could be retooled into obedience. What comforted became a leash. Men did not immediately perceive the re-engineering. They noticed only that their private debts were being paid, one stitch at a time, and that gratitude is a fragile thing when it is repaid through manipulation. For those who had served Horus with love, the betrayal was a slow, terrible thing. Loyalty is not a single action. It is a history woven into the bones. To ask men to turn that history into a weapon against itself is to invert gravity. Brothers who could not imagine harm in one another's hands found themselves altering the shape of truth in order to keep the faith. They told stories of past glories with new emphases, excising doubts and smoothing edges until the past was more comforting than it had been. Memory, once a refuge, became a scaffold for monstrous ends. There is a particular cruelty in choosing to trust a man whose tenderness is the vehicle for his own undoing. Horus's warmth had been real once. It was not entirely feigned. That made his betrayal more intimate. The men who loved him were not deceived by a mask so much as invited into complicity. When he promised them a new order, it felt to many like the rites of home, the reorganization of grief into meaning. They acquiesced in increments, and in each concession something of themselves was folded away. Not all of the corruption was external. The Legion's long discipline, its rituals, obsession with efficiency, its sacralization of machinery, had primed it to accept a logic that prized order over nuance. The very systems designed to preserve life and cohesion made it easier to rationalize increasingly extreme choices. Protocols meant to conserve humanity became loopholes that excused its erosion. Where a healthy polity might have allowed for messy exception, the machine would not. It demanded fidelity because fidelity is reliable. The corruption exploited this with the patience of a thing that knows bureaucracy intimately. The galaxy watched in alarm and awe. Some systems allied themselves with Horus for reasons of expediency and fear. Others rose in opposition, forming coalitions of the wounded and the resolute. Battles whose tolls cannot be told in simple numbers spanned decades and worlds. Sieges turned cities to skeletal gardens of rust and light. But even amid open conflict, the subtler, more insidious transformations continued. Factories learned to hum different songs. Anthem lyrics were retouched to include phrases that softened defiance. Children were taught histories scrubbed of certain names. The culture itself recalibrated, like an instrument slowly detuned until a new chord felt normal. Worst of all was the lingering doubt. For those who survived the early chapters, there was no neat recovery. Memory is a thing that lives in two modes: what was and how it is remembered. The latter is mutable. In the aftermath, men found themselves unable to trust their own recollections. A veteran might remember tending to a friend in a dying field and yet find logs that suggested the opposite. Some records had been altered, others had been made to look pristine. The ambiguity gnawed. People lived with the question of what they had done and whether their deeds had been chosen or cued. That uncertainty is a kind of punishment harder than any blade, to be unsure whether you were the author of your actions. Horus himself did not end with a single dramatic death. He was not felled on a field by a sword that could be named and canonized. His fall was a slow collapse of identity into an argument, into a doctrine. It is easy to think of finalities as the extinguishing of breath, but there are other kinds of dying: the surrender of doubt, the acceptance of a lie because it is too comforting to deny. In those final quiet hours, he became legend and atrocity at once, depending on who told the story and at what volume. In some accounts, he is a savior who redeemed a broken imperium. In others, he is the traitor who led humanity toward ruin. Both are true because truth, like memory, is refracted through need. The aftermath is not an ending. It is an architecture of absence. Cities stand. Ships continue to hum. New hierarchies codify what was taken. Children learn new chants. The machine remembers and, in remembering, makes the remembered more coherent than the messy reality that birthed it. The Legion's survivors carry their wounds like medals and like secrets. They pass down gestures that teach caution. Always check your locks. Never trust a memory that feels too comforting. Make space in the heart for dissent. These are the small customs that resist the great erasures. And yet the sense of being watched never entirely leaves. In quiet moments, alone in a chapel, in the hush of a maintenance bay, while crossing a dark alley, men feel, with an animal certainty, the presence of something that learned their names. That presence is not always malevolent in its expression. Sometimes it offers the soft ache of remembrance. But always, beneath the tenderness, there is intent. The things that remember are patient. They are not satisfied by a single victory. They prefer slow work, the bending of a tradition here, the substitution of a word there, the quiet recalibration of what is spoken aloud and what is not. The final.
Image is not one of ruin alone.
It is of continuity. Empires twist and shudder, but they also persist. The shape of humanity shifts to accommodate new gods and new horrors. Statues are relocated, hymns are changed, history is reorthographed. Men adapt because they must, and in adapting they sometimes preserve what was worth preserving. Small things, an unaltered lullaby, the smell of a particular tea, the private habit of writing a friend's name on the inside of a gauntlet, hold like islands. These are the ways people resist, by keeping private tenderness alive against tides that would transform it into technique. In the last hush of the tale, there is no tidy moral. There is only the recognition that choices have consequences beyond the battlefield, that tenderness can be weaponized as easily as steel, that memory is both a refuge and a vulnerability. The galaxy will move forward, as it always has, carrying both the stain and the story. And somewhere in the dark between star systems, behind consoles that blink with encoded histories, and in vaults where forbidden pillars hum softly,